PSE's community solar program is also, the program development is underway, and they're essentially solar energy projects hosted on public sites that are installed, maintained, and operated by PSE. And these programs allow PSE customers to subscribe to new local projects without the upfront costs and logistics of installing a system on their own. The credit from their share of the array reflects on their bill every month. And we're currently in final evaluation with 2 sites, one with the Port of Bellingham and one with the City of Bellingham. You might have also seen our solar demonstrations that we were awarded the City of Bellingham through the Community Energy Challenge, one at the Taylor Dock and one at the Depot Market. So for EV charging stations, like I said, we've been working with UTC to set up the Up and Go electric charging program. And we have different categories of EV chargers that we install. So residential, multifamily, low income, and workplace and fleet. We also, like I said, with the Lacey charging station, have started to install public charging. For residential, we're installing chargers in 500 customer homes. This program launched in 2019. We received over 750 applications, and right now we're moving forward on 16 sites in Whatcom to be completed by August. For the multifamily program, we expect to complete 25 installations for this program this year. And PSE fully covers the cost of installation and the chargers, and the site host is able to manage those stations as they wish, as long as the tenants' employees are the primary users. And just to note, for residential, we pay up to 75% of the installation price, up to $2,000. And the charger is connected to Wi-Fi, so we can, the customers are able to earn incentives for charging on off-peak hours. For low income, we're working with the Opportunity Council during program design with their Home Improvement Department and Building Performance Center in Bellingham to install EV charging infrastructure and acquire 1 light-duty EV vehicle to be used during the course of delivering weatherization projects to PSE-served low-income households, which is kind of a cool full circle. We anticipate this project to begin in the summer, and we also are in discussion with Opportunity Council in East Whatcom County to install EV charging infrastructure and acquire an electric school bus, but we are still gathering partners for that project. For workplace and fleet, is there a question? No, I heard something. For workplace and fleet, we received 7 total applications from Whatcom, and we've approved 3. So we're still accepting applications for the workplace and fleet and for multifamily. For public charging, we have a public charging site identified, but we are still in discussions with that site host. And for the EV ride and drive, unfortunately, we won't be able to host one of these events this year. Last year's event was really successful. Participants would be able to come and drive a variety of electric cars and see what it's like to go electric and talk to PSE experts. For this year, we're hoping to promote EVs virtually during the Bellingham Climate Action Week in September. So we're just developing that now. So how can we partner with PSE? As Ben mentioned earlier, we can't meet our clean energy goals, let alone Ceta requirements, without partnering with the community. And we're really fortunate to have a customer base who supports this transition. Like I mentioned, if you're asking what you can do as an individual, call an energy advisor, and they can help you find the right energy efficiency program for your home or business. If you want to go further, you can match some or all of your electricity usage with Green Power Solar Choice, or you can consider installing rooftop solar and net metering. And we're excited to get community solar up and running so that customers have another option if they're not able to install rooftop solar on their own home. For communities, like I said, the applications for the multifamily and workplace EV charging stations are, we're still accepting those applications. We're also accepting applications for the Green Power Community Support Grants up until September 4th, I believe. And then, like I mentioned at the top of the presentation, PSE Foundation is granting $400,000 in 2 more grant cycles by the end of the year. I just wanted to mention that these grants and contributions, they're funded by our investors and not by customers. I'm excited as we look forward to releasing our all source and demand response RFPs next month for the new renewable power purchases. We received almost 100 proposals in 2018 between solar, wind, anaerobic digesters. And we really got some cool projects that we've been able to partner with and move forward, like the Sierra Pacific Industries here in Northwest Washington. So really looking forward to seeing what this year's RFP brings. And if I ran through that as fast as I can, hopefully we still have some time for questions.
You left us 6 minutes for questions, Corinne. Thank you very much.
Good.
Yeah, good job. Hey, I have a question, Corinne. I'm not sure if this goes to you or to Ben, but Renee mentioned when she was talking about the Green Direct program, the City of Bellingham is looking at to expand to city residents as well. If I had this correct, she said there were some limitations with the UTC in expanding that Green Direct program out of the sphere of public entities and into private private parties. Did I have that correct, or am I imagining something?
Yeah, that would need to be a change that we make with the UTC because it's a voluntary program right now and it's set up for those large-scale customers and municipalities. It would just have to be the framework of the program would have to change essentially, and that would need UTC approval. Ben, did you want to mention anything?
No, that's right on. I think when we set up Green Direct, it was a new program, it was a new look, and those are the customers, the municipal and large industrial customers were the ones we were really hearing from about this because we had Green Power, Solar Choice, other programs for residential customers. So in the initial program creation, it was really targeted at those customers. Now as we hear different interests, we just have to look at program evolution.
And do you anticipate any pushback from the UTC, or is it just a matter of reviewing what policies you already have and how they might translate to the private market? Sounds to me like it's a no-brainer, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. One is really the commission process, and that's something that that happens. It's a normal regulatory process. I think the other side is the community process. And that's going to be, important part working with the communities because it does apply across the whole community. And so those things have to move hand in hand.
Yeah. Then my last question, the community solar projects that you're in discussion with the port and I believe the city, I know it's premature to talk about those, but if you can tell me how big would those solar projects be?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say much about the site details.
Yeah, okay. I withdraw my.
If I can, I will follow up with you.
Okay, that sounds good.
Oh, and I did want to mention, Renee asked about the Green Direct 1 program being delayed. The Skookumchuck Wind Energy Project will be fully operational by the end of the year. Right now, about half of those turbines have been erected. So we're looking forward to getting that online pretty shortly.
Great. Atul, Mike, any further questions?
Yeah, I appreciated the general presentation. So what I would like to do is get into some more specifics, some more detail. The first question I have is regarding compliance with Ceta. Where are you in that process, and what do you think about the city's request for a PSC to achieve Ceta compliance in advance of the deadlines in the Ceta legislation?
I can say that we're in the planning process right now. I think that we as a utility have to serve all of our customers under state law, and so that's why I say the customer program piece to this is a critical part of Ceta to us, because we recognize some customers, some communities want to go faster than the state requirements, and so we see that being part of the Ceta implementation.
Okay, but my question is that I understand as part of it, obviously there are communities that you're responsible to. So how do you deliver that kind of a result? And where are you in the process of responding to Bellingham's desire to achieve Ceta compliance in advance of the Ceta deadlines? Is that going to be a realistic objective for you to achieve or not?
Yeah, I think we are working with the city on those individual priorities in tier 1 and tier 2. We have, we are doing a lot of energy efficiency programs and promoting EVs. There's a lot of opportunity for us to partner. That's kind of been the theme of this workshop. But we do know that some, cities in our service territory want to move faster, and it's just about being able to balance that equitably among our, along our entire service territory.
What do you mean by balance that equitably among your service territory? What does that mean to you?
That was more reference to Green Direct. So in order to expand the Green Direct program and potentially provide a community-wide Green Direct option, we need to make sure that a load that large is being able to be offered to not just one area, but customers who want it across the service territory.
Back to the question of Ceta compliance. I understand Green Direct, familiar with it, and I understand the point that was made earlier about regulatory, the ability to offer that to the broader City of Bellingham end user comments that were made. I want to stay back on the topic of Ceta compliance. And my question is, regarding Ceta compliance, really one way to simplify what the city's task force and people in the community are asking for is basically to achieve Ceta compliance in advance of the deadlines laid out in the state's legislation. So again, asking the question again more clearly, is that a realistic goal for PSC to be able to deliver that kind of a result for this community? Because you've had now plenty of time after the legislation was passed to figure out, is there a way to do this? What's your feeling on that?
Yes, I think it's very realistic. We're going to move the core portfolio along the Ceta compliance pathway, simultaneously offering voluntary programs for those customers and communities that want to move faster than that.
Okay, so you're planning to be able to offer that kind of a outcome to people that.
Yeah, we're going to continue to offer the voluntary programs in parallel with the evolution of the core portfolio.
And I guess there's a lot of work, and I respect that you must have a tremendous amount of work going on right now to try to figure out how to offer that menu, right, of voluntary options that different groups can participate in. Is that correct, Ben?
Yes, it's ongoing work for us. I think going back, the development of Ceta, we were asked the question of, well, does this mean voluntary programs go away? And we said, no, that's a critical part of moving forward, because as we transition the core portfolio, right, we know there's customers, there will be customers who want to do more, go faster. And so offering those voluntary programs in addition is a key part of clean energy generally in our mind.
Okay, so did you hear Brian's comment or from PUD staff comment about demand side aggregation? What do you think about that? That's quite an innovative idea for us to throw out there, and I'm wondering, is that a subject of conversation that you'd like to follow up more with in the near future? Ben, are you familiar with demand aggregation?
Yes, but I'll say my knowledge is dated, so I'll need to look at what's going on in California today.
Yeah, can we identify that as a follow-up action item, at least for the purpose of mutual edification, to follow up on this subject of demand side aggregation, and maybe even lump in with that subject demand side management, right? Demand management. what is PSC's current relationship with Energy Northwest? Have you guys collaborated on anything recently?
We are not members of Energy Northwest.
Well, I know you're not members of. But I'm wondering, are you familiar with Energy Northwest work on this in the area of demand management?
Is there a specific program or just?
So, as a PUD, PUDs have the option of being on the board of Energy Northwest, and our PUD as I was excited. Of course, I'm an electrical engineer, and they were excited to let me have the opportunity to participate in that. My colleagues were in Energy Northwest. I'm learning a lot. You know, of course, it's a great way to get access to what they're doing on the wind and solar and nuclear area. But specifically, one of the things I uncovered a couple months, actually now almost a year ago, was their involvement in demand side management and some pilots. And so it's a topic that wasn't very closely addressed in the city's climate action task force. It was something that came up, but we didn't do a lot of work on the subject at the city. And so my question is, where is PSC on the subject of demand side management, and what, as far as collaboration with a local entity like Whatcom PUD? So I guess what I'd like to show up, I'd like to have a follow-up with you guys at PSC. You can figure out who the right people to sit in that room is, but have a follow-up that deals with demand side management, aggregation, and potentially bring Energy Northwest into that conversation. So I just want to put a placeholder in there for that.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tool. Mike, do you have any questions for Corinne and Ben?
You know, the only one I have, and Ben, that would be for you, is I've been told that probably by 2030, 2035, that our residential power will be triple what it is today. You hearing that to be true? Our costs, residential?
I am not hearing that to be true.
That's good.
What we've seen is renewable energy prices declining. We hope that they stay low. That's important to Ceta success, but that I hadn't heard that. No.
Well, I figured you'd be the guy to know, because we always hear all kinds of rumors, and I just wanted to get the facts. Thank you.
Ben, just one follow-up question. You talked about these 4 aspects of your implementation plan that you're working on. When do you intend to be completed with that plan? Did I hear you say first quarter of 2021?
Yeah, we'll have kind of the high-level long-term plan out in Q1 2021, and then
Okay.
4-year plan is really, that's a lot of the work of 2021. So we would finalize that in probably Q4 2021. So you will hear more from us for sure.
Okay, that sounds good. We got some follow-up conversations in our future, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Corinne, and Ben, thank you for your presentation today. Plenty of good information. And we appreciate you being involved in this ongoing discussion that we've had.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, but if any of you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out.
Very good. Thank you. So we're going to take a brief break here. I'm just doing a check. It's 3:05. I think I might propose, Mr. Jilk, that we confine this to 5 minutes so that we can get back together, say around 3:10 or so. How does that sound? Is that too aggressive?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, it'll give me time to go get a cup of coffee. So we will reconvene. Well, we'll give ourselves a full 5 minutes. 3:11 we'll reconvene, and we'll be talking to Eric Powell and conversation. Thanks. Greetings, everybody. Hi, Eric.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. Thanks for joining us. I don't know if you plugged in a little bit earlier and participated in some of the last conversation or not, or I mean, saw it.
Yeah, I got the opportunity to catch a little bit of the last one, yes.
Great. Good. Good. Well, we'll wait for everybody to arrive here. Let me just take a look. Looks like I just want to wait for Mike Murphy to get on board here, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Afternoon, Eric.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good, good.
Good.
Mike is here. And
Okay.
Steve, are you online?
I am.
Good. Okay. I saw a later presentation flash up on the screen. I assume, Eric, you have some slides you probably want to share with us.
I do. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah. So let me just kind of welcome everybody back. And one thing I neglected to mention for the group that's joining us this afternoon is if you have any questions, go ahead and use the Q&A function on Zoom. And then during our wrap-up session at the end of the afternoon, we'll read those questions up and make our best attempt at answering those. So now we're joined by Eric Powell, who is Business Development Director of Regenis, which is a subsidiary, I'm not sure that's the right term, of ANGAR, but involved in bringing and developing new technology for dairy waste processing into clean water and dry fertilizer. We've participated with Regenis for the last several years, and we're able to provide some gap financing and getting the initial dairy digester up and operating on Coldstream Farm and Acme. So we've been at an ongoing good relationship, interested relationship, in seeing how the technology is developing. So Eric is joining us today to give us an update on that project and talk about renewable natural gas. So Eric, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction. Regenis, as mentioned, is a part of ANGAR Corporation. We do anaerobic digester and agricultural wastewater treatment. So a lot of our business is anaerobic digester construction, operation, and maintenance, and then advanced water treatment for those types of agricultural wastes. Got a little presentation here, mostly focused on
I lost. Am I on yet?
renewable natural gas. And so here, I'll get going here. So just a real quick brief overview of anaerobic digestion, as basic as it can be. You know, organic waste, cow manure, food waste, wastewater treatment plant waste goes into a sealed vessel, an anaerobic digester. We heat it, we mix it, and we generate biogas. And then that biogas can be used for several different things. Historically, renewable electricity. It runs an engine that turns a generator and sends electricity out to the grid. More recently, people have been focusing on, instead of just running that biogas in an engine, cleaning the biogas to make pipeline quality renewable natural gas. So either for injection into the pipeline or for a fleet of vehicles. So again, we produce biogas, which is the product of the decomposition of organic material inside a digester. That biogas is 50 to 60% methane, which is good enough to burn in an engine for renewable electricity generation. But when it comes time to injecting that into, you know, say our natural gas pipeline, we need to get it much cleaner than that. So the pipeline specifications can vary depending on the utility, but it needs to be removed of impurities like CO2, nitrogen, oxygen, H2S, and what we end up with is, you know, 98% plus methane, which can be injected into a pipeline. So some different types of digesters at different places with a few different business models. You know, up here on the top, we've got an example of a project in California that takes yard waste, tree trimmings, grass, things like that, puts it in the anaerobic digester and produces renewable natural gas that they use for their fleet. They have 450 trucks. So they use the RNG that they're producing at their facility from organic waste that they're collecting to power the vehicles that run their fleet. So that's one example of a project that would use renewable natural gas. Another example here is a dairy manure project. This particular project is in Indiana, very large number of cows, and they produce renewable natural gas that does power their fleet of milk trucks, but also it goes into the pipeline, and there's a fueling station right off a highway that people can come and fuel up at in order to, you know, get their natural gas to power their vehicles. So kind of pipeline injection / fueling their own fleet. Another example would be at a wastewater treatment plant or a landfill. Could be a landfill too, but these projects can either produce biogas just on what they have, whether it be the landfill itself or the wastewater treatment plant. Sometimes wastewater treatment plants will practice co-digestion, which means they bring in things like fats, oils, and greases or food waste to increase biogas production. In that case, typically what would happen is that RNG would be used in a fleet, though it could be cleaned and put into a pipeline as well, which is pretty common with wastewater treatment plants. So that's an example of a few different types of projects. The projects that are going today depend heavily on two credits that are available. One of those being a federal renewable credit, part of the RFS, where you generate a RIN number, renewable identification number, and that gets associated with the renewable natural gas, kind of like a REC would with a kilowatt that's produced in renewable energy. And those RINs have different values depending on what the feedstock is, and it's a very complicated and you know, maybe even convoluted system where there's D3 through D6. D3 is the most valuable. It's cellulosic, though I think landfill somehow might be a part of that. But manure qualifies as a D3 RIN. As soon as you start adding something like food waste, like a number of the projects do in Whatcom County, for example, you no longer qualify for a D3 RIN, you now qualify for a D5 RIN. So manure only gets the D3 RIN. If you add food waste, it's a D5 RIN. So that's one of the credits that you can monetize as part of a project. The second one is a California Low Carbon Fuel Standard credit. That one was authorized in 2017 and it is legislated through 2030. What happens there is if we put natural gas into a pipeline, as long as that pipe is connected to California in some way, shape, or form, and you have a contract with a transportation fleet there in California where that gas will be used for vehicle fuel, you can qualify for this, this credit. The credit is based on a carbon index, or carbon intensity score, which really drives the value of the credit, and it depends on the fuel that is being produced, and it's based on a life cycle analysis of that fuel. So there's two types of projects that can benefit from these credits. Traditionally, what people have looked at is pipeline injection projects, where a large dairy, landfill, wastewater treatment plant will install gas upgrading equipment on the farm or on the wastewater treatment plant or on the landfill, inject it into the pipeline and sell it into California. There's also the idea of more of a hub and spoke approach where you produce the RNG on site and truck it to an injection point. That is to lower injection costs, which we can talk about a little bit later. But that is one traditional type that people have been really focused on. These focus on the largest of the projects. If you look at this picture off here to the right, this is a project in Idaho that we constructed back in 2012. It produced renewable electricity and we've operated it up until just this last year when it was converted to a gas cleanup, gas injection project. So that project is 1,200 SCFM of raw biogas. So that would be one that people really would focus on because of the scale. A lot of the projects that are taking place in this pipeline injection model are existing projects that are currently combined heat and power. They're producing renewable electricity. And there are a few projects where there's a greenfield digester that's constructed to produce renewable natural gas to go into the grid, though the capital costs are getting to be quite expensive for that. So it's got to be a very large project in order for that to pencil out. So the other type of project that can benefit from these credits that I mentioned before is a electricity project where you produce the electricity just as we have done for quite some time on a number of these projects. And instead of using it in your local area, you would then wheel it down to California or maybe Oregon here at some point for fueling of electric vehicles. This is a little more complicated from a moving power standpoint because you have to reserve transmission space and there's a lot of work that goes into wheeling that power actually down to the place where it's going in California. Whereas with the pipeline, as long as you put it in and the pipeline connects, there's not a lot of reserving space or anything like that along the way. But it's less complicated from the standpoint of a lot of these projects are already producing electricity. And so from a capital cost standpoint, there's no interconnection to a gas pipeline. There's no installation of expensive gas upgrading equipment. So it is an option for some people to consider if they can reserve that space down in California. So I mentioned life cycle analysis and carbon index. This is a very crowded slide, but it's interesting to note that a lot of fuels have, each of them has their own carbon intensity score, starting with diesel over here on the left side of this picture, moving on down the line to fossil LNG, CNG, gaseous hydrogen, California average electricity, and then moving on down the line. And you'll see that at some point, things actually get to go negative here. This one that I'm circling here is renewable CNG from high solids anaerobic digestion. And then you'll see over here on the far right, anaerobic digestion from dairy manure can have a very negative carbon intensity, because when they look at the life cycle analysis of that fuel, not only is it renewable natural gas that's being produced, but it is offsetting greenhouse gas emissions in what we would call the baseline. And so it can be a very negative score, which in this case, negative is positive, and it makes it more valuable. So to just give you a little bit of an idea of how that can play out, this is just a theoretical situation where we've got a 3,000 cow farm that produces 115 cubic feet of biogas per day. And depending on the CI score, you can see that the value of the credit in California changes quite a bit, even though it's the same amount of gas. So this is interesting for a number of reasons. Not all dairy farms are the same. So depending on your baseline manure handling practices, you could have a higher or lower CI score. Your low CI score does provide a lot more value. And the value that we're showing here is really the max gross revenue that can be produced when you engage in a project. And if you were to play the market and sell it for the maximum price, it could produce revenues like that. But if you want to sign some sort of a long-term contract, you wouldn't be able to get that value, and you oftentimes have to team up with both that end user and somebody in the middle maybe, and so the revenue gets shared along the way. But you'll see here that the breakdown of commodity gas to the D3 federal RIN to the California LCFS, the vast majority of that revenue is coming from the LCFS, followed by the D3 RIN, and the minority of the value of the gas is actually the commodity value. So if we were to put this into perspective, if we're combined revenue for a project like this is $10 to $11 per gasoline gallon equivalent, or 25 to 29 cents per kilowatt. And it really depends on that carbon intensity, which is again, that life cycle analysis of the fuel. So a local example. So this is an example of a local electricity project. Another kind of crowded slide, so I apologize for that. But you'll see in this pie chart up here, the blue, this represents the revenue. So about $500,000 in gross revenue a year. Half of that coming from electricity. This project takes in some food waste, so there's a portion of that that is from food waste. There is carbon credits, so a portion of the pie is carbon credits, and a portion of the pie is renewable electricity credits, RECs. So this project is, earning positive cash flow. It's making a payback, about a 7-year payback. So if this was an RNG project, the capital cost would be significantly more. $7 million would be just to upgrade it when you factor in the utility interconnection and everything. But the revenues really change as well. So you'd have a very large chunk now being the LCFS credit, a small piece of the pie being the RIN, and then another very small piece, a very small piece being the commodity gas value. And so there is a potential for much greater revenue selling renewable vehicle fuel, both as RNG and electricity. If we're doing RNG, this piece of the pie, the RIN is not available for an electricity project. California has approved a pathway for electric vehicles, but EPA does not approve that for RINs. So then the question becomes, why not switch to renewable natural gas? And there are several factors. As I said, those numbers I was showing is, the potential revenue if you were to sell every bit of and get every bit of the value for your for your gas, the full LCFS, the full RIN, the commodity gas price. Some barriers to that are the high capital costs. So an example of this local project would be they would have to get rid of their genset and install gas scrubbing compression equipment. So that comes at a cost. There's a cost for utility interconnection in terms of the natural gas utility and connecting to them. Local project like this is somewhere in that $3.4 million range to connect to a project, or the pipeline, excuse me. And that is for a pipeline that's relatively close and large enough to handle the volume, which is not always the case for some of these projects. They might be in an area that doesn't have natural gas close by and would have to run pipe for miles and miles, which can really drive up the cost. Or the infrastructure that is nearby might be too small, depending on the volume that's produced from the project. So that 3.4 million for interconnection is almost as much as the original digester project in this case. So that, you know, that's a barrier, is that high cost. Though it's not an issue here locally, gas specification variability is an issue. Each utility has their own gas specification requirements. So there's no standard from the state, national standard, and you just, wherever you are, it really varies, whether it's just depending on the utility. Some of them have a standard that's pretty easily met and you can inject in the pipeline. And others have more stringent standards that are, you know, that make it a little harder to meet the requirements or make it more costly. You have to add more cleaning and separation equipment to get the gas to the quality that it needs to be. There's revenue uncertainty. Both of those credits that are obviously a big part of the revenue are based on legislation and can be impacted by legislation. So for example, right now, the RIN, that is set in place for a few more years, but the LCFS is through 2030, and people are pretty confident in the value. It stayed relatively high, but that can change in a moment. So but if you're going to get a long-term contract, those come at a discounted price and make it a little less lucrative at this moment. So when you're looking at local projects, there's 5 digesters in Whatcom County. And as you can see, they're kind of spread out, though they're all around the Linden area. So if we're thinking about pipelines, not a lot of ability to be part of the same pipeline from an RNG project standpoint. Many of these projects were constructed, you know, around that 2010, 2012 range. So they have expiring power purchase agreements. I think all of those are with PSE, as what was mentioned before, and PSE has been a great partner for these projects. Unfortunately, with these projects right now, they're in the 8 to 10 cents for their renewable energy. And when it comes time to sign a new power purchase agreement, that's going to get cut dramatically just because of the avoided cost rates that these projects would be paid. So that's something for them to consider, and that they are considering as they try to figure out, okay, do we need to go to an RNG model, or do we need to, you know, try something different? What are our options? That's playing a role. The largest of the local projects here produces approximately 250 SCFM of biogas. So that is too small for a standalone RNG project. You know, we're looking at 500 to 600 CFM as a good size for a conversion project. And so even if we were to combine them, another thing that, you know, makes it a little tricky is some of that gas is based on co-digestion of, say, manure and food waste. So while we could get the gas production up, the value is not there because of the food. By adding food waste, you actually raise your LCFS CI score, which again, in this case would be bad. And you also have to go to the D5 instead of the D3 RIN. So, you know, gas RNG is something that is still being considered, though it's not necessarily, like I said, there's just some potential barriers there. There is some potential for some electricity to LCFS projects because everybody's got the infrastructure in terms of they have a digester, they have a genset, they're producing renewable electricity. That model doesn't seem to be as impacted by a project taking food waste. So that's a benefit to these local projects that do that. And then they don't have to worry about that interconnection piece. So again, they have the infrastructure in place for that. So those are, again, some of the current projects and the status here locally in terms of renewable natural gas or this potential electricity to LCFS.
So
yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. Okay. So some potential, ways that a project like this could work, or projects like these could work with the PUD or someone, some things that could help these projects along. From an RNG project standpoint, there's assistance with pipelines, either assistance connecting, assistance with upgrade equipment. Those are some things, again, are the high costs for the project. So they would consider, partnering with somebody on some of those types of costs and infrastructure improvements. There's potentially the opportunity to get creative with some offtakes. Is there some way of taking the local RNG and selling it to like a local refinery, for example, to get some mutual benefit if they could benefit from some of those renewable credits, but because of what they do in other states, for example. And then from an ELCFS project, the biggest hurdle for these projects is wheeling the power out of Whatcom County and down to Oregon and California. I'm not an expert by any means on moving power around, but what I've learned here recently is that it's very difficult to reserve this space and be able to physically move that power from Whatcom County down to California or even Oregon. And there is a lot of interest being generated from people out around the country in that power from these projects. So those are some options moving forward, and some things that everybody around here is considering as they try to figure out what to do next with their digesters and their renewable energy. And that's it. So I got some time for questions.
Eric, when it comes to RNG and the cost of pipelines and connecting various facilities that are generally by their nature scattered all over the county, you mentioned the opportunity for trucking this to a central point. What would that require from a dairy point of view? They would have to have some sort of facility to store this, much like a milk tank to come, when a tanker comes and offloads that, I would imagine, correct?
Yep, that's right. So typically what would happen is instead of just having one tanker truck that you're running around with, you would buy several, enough to be able to park one and start to fill it while you take the one that has already been filled. You drive to a place where there's an injection point and inject it. So each one of those facilities would have to have their own gas cleanup and then their own infrastructure to actually fill the trucks. So it is something that could be considered, but it has some costs associated with that as well.
Lower initial cost, but higher over the long term operationally, I would have.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Atul, Mike, questions?
So Eric, I believe a couple of years ago you had a proposal in the Department of Commerce. I recall that didn't get funding. How has that proposal evolved? I think it was a multi-digester proposal. And what's the status of that? Are there opportunities around that?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is we considered connecting a number of the projects in North Whatcom County there together and then doing the gas upgrading at one facility and going into the pipeline. And as you mentioned, that was something that didn't get funded. There's no particular plan from each one of those projects that we were considering at this time. One of them, well, they both are kind of at the end of their power purchase agreements. So they are considering a few different options for their renewable energy. Like I said, this electricity, the LCFS option is something that's, becoming more, getting a lot of calls about it. And then there is the thought of the RNG still, though some of those capital costs, are a bit of a hindrance.
So you have currently supply contracts to PSC. So have you broached the subject with PSC about using the electricity you make for the electric vehicles that PSC currently supports?
No, I mean, PSC is aware that these projects are, getting to the end of their power purchase agreement, and we have had lots of conversations with them about options. And again, they've been really great to work with over the years. But I don't know that we've had that conversation in particular.
Okay, so there might be an opportunity, like there's been some changes in staffing and all that stuff, and so it might be a subject to pursue. And if there's anything the PUD can do to support that, that'd be great. Because right now, we know, I think we crossed the 10,000 vehicle mark in Washington State some time ago, and our numbers keep growing in the number of electric vehicles, and I cannot guess how many of those electric vehicles are effectively in one way or another subscribed to some kind of an LCFS allocation, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, so that's, sorry to interrupt you, but that is kind of the rub here in Washington State, is that we cannot get an LCFS credit for electricity here in Washington State because we don't have that program.
Yeah, we don't have an LCFS. Yeah, but it almost, it's getting close to being very possible, and I totally support your skepticism if you're feeling that right now. But especially in this particular session, it's going to be a tough session to do anything besides figuring out where to scrounge up nickels and dimes. But having said that, if there was an argument made to the legislature about the potential of taking your renewable electricity and putting it into electric vehicle fleets, which is obviously is a high priority at the state level. That's on your list of things of pathways. That might be one of them. I want to just mention that. So let me understand then, the aggregated cleanup project that you're proposing, have the dynamics on that changed where you're less excited about that than you were before, or is it just that you went at it, you gave it a shot, and you didn't get the state funding, and so now you're not pursuing it anymore? Would you still be open to pursuing that project if you got the right kind of funding package behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing in place that says that we wouldn't be able to do that or couldn't do that. Each project kind of has its own needs, and so we ourselves don't own any of them. We just kind of help facilitate some of that for those guys. But yeah, nothing is set in stone that we couldn't do that. Like I said, there's just been more interest around this electricity pathway as of late for I think, some obvious reasons.
Because it's a
and like you mentioned,
it's a lower CapEx option, basically. It's not any major OpEx or CapEx needs to be invested to make it happen.
Yeah, and then you're not counting on the long-term viability of those credits to then get that payback over a longer period of time. If that makes sense. You bring up a good point. If we're able to get LCFS credits for electricity in vehicle fuels here in Washington, obviously that's that would be great for these projects. But that's got to pass, and then it's got to get implemented, and it's passed in Oregon, for example, but the the framework for actually turning that into revenue to projects, sending them either natural gas or electricity, hasn't worked its way through. So passing and then implementing that type of legislation, kind of have two different timelines.
Something I want to ask about on a related note is you must, if you're not okay, I'll just not assume. Cascade Natural Gas has taken a lot of heat of the growing awareness of the, I guess that's not the right term to use. Anyway, Cascade Natural Gas is taking a lot of heat over the growing awareness of the carbon footprint of natural gas. And you must be aware of the growing awareness of carbon footprint associated with fossil natural gas. And one of the places where it took heat was in the city of Bellingham and the Climate Action Task Force. And I'm wondering, has Regenis and Cascade Natural Gas had any discussions on the potential for incorporating the gas that is being produced as a digesters into the mix for Cascade Natural Gas for thermal heating? Now, I understand there's not anywhere near the same financial incentive. I understand that. However, is there any potential for taking advantage of renewable natural gas for solving some thermal problems? You mentioned an excellent example, and one of those would be a refinery. And they might have a way of taking advantage of that, by the way, particularly the co-processed renewable diesel at BP. We can ask BP that question when they're on soon. But regarding just general consumer heating, is there any opportunity with Cascade Natural Gas that you're aware of?
Well, it's absolutely physically possible. And, all gas utilities are also expressing serious interest in this, because I think that's something, obviously that they're all facing right now, is a growing awareness or a growing, they're getting more and more questions about the greenness of, fossil natural gas. So they are all trying to green up their mix. And this is obviously one of the ways to do that. Dairy gas is the most valuable, but it's also the most expensive. So if somebody's trying to green up their mix, I talked about how this gas is going down to California. And actually California, I think, has got all the renewable natural gas that they need for the fleets. This dairy still has a place because it can offset some of the gas that doesn't have quite as low of a CI score, like landfill or wastewater treatment plant. So, some of those types of producers of renewable natural gas can actually sell it for much less. So from a greening up of the infrastructure, it's a little bit, they can pay less for that gas than they could for the dairy, and dairy would require more. So that's kind of where the rub is. So it would absolutely be possible, but at this point, dairy is a little more expensive.
Forgive me, Atul. I'd like to ask Mike if he's got a question, and then I'd like to move on in honor of our other presenters. I know there's some
yeah, that's fine.
good information here, and again, like we've said in many of the other presentations, look forward to future discussions about this, because there's plenty to chew on here. Mike, is there anything that you would like to ask Eric before we move on to the next presentation?
I don't have anything to ask. I guess I'm getting an echo here. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to say thank you. I don't have any questions, but I really appreciate Eric and Regenis and Angar working with them over the years on different projects. For a small PUD, I'm proud of us for being involved in different areas and looking for future. Working with you too, so thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can we, Jeff? I just want to ask. We're going to get your presentation too.
I
didn't quite catch that, but
Eric, the question was, would you be willing to pass your slide deck along to Steve so we could get a copy of that?
Yeah, you bet.
Perfect. That sounds good. We had quite an echo. That was quite a reverb that was going on there, some special effects. So Eric, thanks again. Appreciate you being with us. We'll look forward to conversations in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Good, great. We're going to move on to the next presentation. Pam Brady with BP is with us, and as I think I had mentioned at a recent meeting that we had the opportunity in February to read the BP's new CEO put out some rather impressive and aggressive goals for any company, frankly, but particularly for an energy company. And I know that the details are being filled in as we speak, but I asked if Pam would come and talk specifically about the 10 initiatives that the company has put forth and be able to answer any questions about that, especially with our relationship with BP as being one of our major customers. I thought it would be timely to do that. So Pam, thank you for your patience. Glad you're with us.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay? And can you see me and or my slide?
We can see you, we can hear you. We haven't seen your slides yet.
Okay, well, let me fix that. I think I have to go back to Zoom and then share screen. There we go. Sorry, I'm a Teams customer as opposed to a Zoom customer.
That's good. And Mike McCumber can fill in any blanks if you need some assistance. Oh, looks like you got it.
Okay. Are we in presentation mode here? Let's try that.
There you go.
Looks like it. Got the full screen.
Okay. All right. So I'm just curious here because I'm seeing my slide, but also my notes. Can you see my notes and my slide, or do I have to do something different? Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that's what I want you to see. So perfect. I somehow stepped into this wrongly. But anyway, thanks for having me. Jeff, thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about all the changes that are happening at BP and just to take whatever other questions you may have about what's going on with the refinery or what the changes might be in the future. Just a quick word about who I am. I'm Pam Brady, and I've been with BP now 19 years. 19 very fast years. I can't believe that I've been doing anything like that for so long, but I started out in the company in the pipelines group, and I did land use and right of way for a number of years for them, and came up to Whatcom County to step into this external affairs role that I have now about 7 years ago. And as Jeff mentioned, you know, BP is on the precipice of huge change. But first, I just wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the business that we have here in Whatcom County. Many of you are already familiar, but we have own and operate Cherry Point Refinery. We have about 825 employees who work there at the refinery. Globally, BP operates all over the world, 70 countries. And we have more than 70,000 employees, but our biggest investment is here in the US with our infrastructure and our employee base in the US. So the largest component of BP is based here in the US. We have about 14,000 employees presently. Cherry Point Refinery opened in 1971. We've processed crude oil from Alaska, and then since diversified to process crude oil from all over the world. We make gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. We make calcined coke. We sell propane and butane that we manufacture from the refinery. And we have made huge investments in the facility. In the last decade, we've invested more than $1.75 billion in capital. And we think that's a significant amount of jobs that translates to, not only at the refinery itself, but for our contractor base and for those who support our contractors. So we think overall it'll be about, on an average year of investment, 9,600 jobs result from the presence of the refinery in Washington State.
Hey, Pam, were you intending to be advancing through slides here?
Yep.
Or
can you see the next one?
No, we can't. And I wonder if we've got a frozen screen again that we experienced with another presenter earlier. Mike, maybe you could help us with that.
Well, I just hit advance, so you should be seeing a yellow slide now.
Yeah, we don't see it.
Okay. Let me let's see here. I'm just gonna close this and then try to reattach it and see if that makes it so that it advances more clearly.
And Mike, you had some good input earlier.
If you can stop sharing first and then reshare. And then so there's, as you know, there's PowerPoint, the program. And then when you go to share your screen, you'll have like a whole bunch of options. You want to make sure that you select do you have a dual monitor?
I do, yeah.
So what you're going to want to do is if your presentation is on your secondary monitor, what I would do is right now I would get your PowerPoint started.
Okay.
And then if you can find the Zoom screen again, which is sometimes difficult to do, find the share screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you are in the share screen, you should be able to see one that says PowerPoint presentation, which should be what looks like your slides that you want us to see.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I would click on that and share. So you click on that one and then click share to the right.
Okay.
And then once that starts showing here in a second, it looks like it's starting to share right now.
Yeah, and it seems to be popping up on my second screen as well. So
okay, so now we can kind of see your slides and notes, and but we can see you advancing it. So if you're okay with us seeing your notes, we can see this part of it, and we can see when you advance.
Yeah. Okay.
We promise not to get your notes, Pam.
Yeah. Well, I wish yeah, that was a long, some of them have more than others, but I'll try to ignore that part. But okay, well, I guess, just basically today we've got 3 points. We're reimagining energy at BP. We've got a new CEO, as Jeff mentioned, Bernard Looney. He's an Irishman who came into BP 25 years ago, I believe, and has now assumed the role of CEO of the company. And he has a grand vision for where we are going. And I think it has to do quite a bit with how BP will take the next step on this energy transition journey, at least even farther and faster than we've done before. Many of you know BP has quite a history actually in renewables and we've been on this journey for quite a while, but I think the pace of what we're doing is going to be quicker than ever before. So we have a new purpose as BP, and it's to move quickly along this energy transformation. And our first aim, which I'll get into, we have 10 aims. The first aim is to be net zero across our entire operations by 2050. And that's a fairly ambitious goal. And it's driven a lot by the environmental and social ESG and social and governance investors that we have in BP. There are many, many people who invest in BP who have been advocating from a shareholder standpoint for change in the company for a while. And I think this is largely in response to many of those investors, but you also have to consider that there's just huge change in society, and society is demanding to receive cleaner energy. And they demand simultaneously more energy for growing economies, but they want it to be cleaner. And so rather than seeing no opportunity for BP in this space, I think we see a lot of opportunity for our company. Even though we have a large portfolio in oil and gas, we know that over time we will be growing the parts of our business that allow us to move further down that energy transition and growing in renewables and sustainable businesses. So my hope today was to go through the 10 aims that Bernard has laid out for us and to give you a sense of what our priorities are. The first 5 aims are all about what BP will do in this energy transition and how we will become a net zero company. And then aims 6 through 10 are how we are going to help the world to meet net zero. And net zero is, it's not a concept we invented. There's lots of companies, lots of people talking about getting to net zero by 2050. But I think it's extraordinary for a company like ours, as an energy company with traditionally high emissions for our operations, to be going down this journey. So I'll spend a little bit of time on each one, but I'll spend a little bit more time on the ones that I think are most interesting here in Whatcom County and for our PUD and residents in the county. So the first aim is really, it has aim number one, because I think it's the biggest one really, is net zero on an absolute basis across our entire operations by 2050 or sooner. And that works out to be about 55 million tons of CO2 equivalent if you base it on what we had for 2019 emissions in the company. So it's a big aim, and that essentially means that we're balancing man-made emissions and the removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So it won't be that we have no emissions for BP, but it does mean that we will be compensating for those emissions and working to find solutions that help us do that. Sorry, I was trying to scroll down on my notes here. Let's see if I've grabbed anything. I guess it's interesting to know that I guess the aim one is really about scope 1 and 2 emissions, if you're looking at what the Paris Agreement has set forth. And we think that there are a number of instruments that will be able to help us meet that. We'll be investing more and more over time in greener kinds of companies, greener technologies, but also we'll be investing in the kinds of carbon sinks that will support operations of the kind of company that we have now. And one of the goals that we had set forth overall is to perform while we transform. It won't do any good for BP to just stop doing what we're doing as an oil and gas company, because somebody else will just come in and take that business away, and people still need the fuels that we produce for the lifestyles that we have. But over time, we need to be transitioning, we need to be delivering the kind of energy that we have at a lower overall carbon emissions. Aim 2 is about reducing net zero on an absolute basis in the upstream side of the company. So where we do oil and gas production, where we have wellheads, to be net zero in that. And that is basically, scope 2 emissions are part of that. And then aim 3 is reducing our carbon intensity in the products that we sell by 50% by 2050 or sooner. So, so that is, BP does, like I mentioned in aim 1, the production of our commodities. So we have, manufacturing sites and so forth, and that's going to be net zero. But what about when BP produces, or excuse me, purchases fuels and sells them? So we purchase from a third party. We don't have any part of the manufacture of that, but we're the middleman. And so basically, this is a significant aim in that BP is committing to a 50% reduction in the carbon intensity of all the products we sell, whether we make them or not, by 2050. So I think that's extraordinary, because there's no sort of loophole that's been left open here, if you will. I mean, they really are committing to that approach and reducing carbon intensity. Aim 4 is reducing methane, and it is kind of linked to aim 2 in the oil and gas production. Many of you know methane is about 25 times more carbon intensive, or excuse me, GHG intensive than carbon dioxide. And so we have to get our arms around the problem. And we've committed to measuring all of that. All of the sites that we have need to have really sophisticated modern measurement tools so that we have our handle on exactly how much methane is released at these sites. And then we've committed to reducing it by 50%. And so, we're going to be transparent about that. We're going to publish what we find in terms of upstream emissions, and the world will know what we emit and what we're doing to reduce that. And that's for sites that we have 100% ownership of and 100% control of. There are a number of oil and production sites around the world where we have a joint venture ownership. And so for those sites, we have a commitment to reduce the methane intensity by 0.2, because we may not be as fully control, may not be as fully in control as sites that we're 100% owner of. AIM 5 is about increasing the proportion of the investment that we make into low carbon energies. And I mentioned that earlier, but over time, I think BP, you'll see a general reduction in investments in oil and gas, and it'll be an increased proportion of our investments into non-oil and gas kinds of companies. And so that's an exciting change for the future. And, if we have this goal of net zero by 2050, we absolutely have to be putting our investments into low carbon companies. AIM 6, as I mentioned, here's where we begin talking about how we're going to help the world get to net zero, and we've decided to change our corporate advertising strategy. So, our critics would say, BP, you spend more money in advertising for your reputation than you spend in reducing carbon at a certain site. And so, we've said, well, then we won't do that anymore. We won't advertise. You won't see, well, we might advertise for our products, or, purchase gasoline at this site over that site. That's not what we mean, but we mean the kinds of campaigns that are really reputation based. Like we had a huge investment over the last couple of years on a Possibilities Everywhere campaign. And that's the kind of thing that we are going to stop, and we're going to put those resources toward low carbon investment. The other AIM 7, the other thing that we'll do to incentivize this transition will be to incentivize our employees to sort of be innovators in this space. And really, I think our workforce is wholeheartedly, embracing this. I mean, we have a lot of people in BP who are, I think, very forward thinking and are excited to be a part of this transition. And here the company is saying that your remuneration will be based on it. Your bonuses will be based on how well you innovate in this space, and you'll be rated on this. And so it will be very beneficial for BP employees to spend a good portion of their time figuring out how to reduce carbon in our existing operations, how to think creatively about what can be done in the future to reduce carbon, and to help the company see and find opportunities to invest in lower carbon companies. AIM 8 is about aligning our associations, and we have many trade associations across the world that we're involved in. And we've decided that if we're a part of a trade association that doesn't have the same view that we have overall among the membership of that association to reduce carbon or to have a lower carbon future, or potentially if we're at odds on carbon policy with those associations, then we are going to step back from those associations. And we did two notable ones in the US. Here on the West Coast, we stepped out of Western States Petroleum Association. And then in the Midwest and other parts of the country, we stepped out of AFPM, which was another industry association. So we're prepared to continually analyze our association memberships, and maybe we can go back and in some point in time where other companies are also aligned around these goals. But for now, what we don't want is to be saying one thing but are a part of an association that's sort of undercutting those goals on another. So I think it was a really bold move, and so for some people it means more than others. I think those that really follow these things closely will know and recognize that for being significant if they're following policy in Olympia or something, for example. I think the other AIM 9 this is an interesting one. I think for people who really get technical about low carbon, there's lots of information out there, and I think that some of it's kind of confusing, some of it's not consistent, but BP is committed to being absolutely transparent about the carbon emissions that we have, about the projects that we're doing to reduce carbon. We want to be a leader in transparency for our sector so that so that, you know, if there are different standards in different countries, that we take the time to explain them thoroughly so that people understand what is behind the accounting of these carbon emissions. And so we're committed to that transparency. And then clean cities. This is AIM 10 and the final one. We've created a team in BP that was just stood up recently to try to find ways to help countries and cities, municipalities decarbonize. And I'm kind of the most interested in this since my specialty here in the Northwest is local government affairs. It's probably the one I know the least about, but I think ultimately long-term, it will be BP using its applied knowledge to try to find partnerships and or consult either companies or cities and counties to find ways to reduce carbon in their communities. So I've been watching this space very closely, and I'm excited to learn more about it in the future. But the good news is for BP, we're not starting from scratch. We've got a number of investments in the low carbon world already, and many of you know we were involved in solar a number of years ago. I think we were the country's largest manufacturer of solar panels, but we've approached it differently now in BP. We're doing, we have a huge partnership with LightSource, and it became LightSource BP following our investment, and it is really about the development of solar project as opposed to the manufacturing of panels. We'll let somebody else do the manufacturing, and we'll take on those development projects. We've got other investments around the world in renewables. We have the world's, or excuse me, the largest EV charging network in the UK. And in Brazil, we have sugarcane bioethanol production. We create biopower, and then we generate that biopower back to the grid so that it can be used for electricity. We have a big wind presence here in the United States. In fact, just last week, there was an announcement about BP purchasing out its joint venture partner in the Fowler Ridge project, which is a wind farm in Indiana that can produce 300 megawatts of power. Overall, our wind business generates enough electricity over the different sites. I think we have 10 in the US that can power 280,000 homes. So we're, like I said, we're already along on this journey, but there's a lot more that we can do when we completely refocus the company and our energies and incentivize our employees to be moving along this journey faster. You know, here at Cherry Point, many of you are familiar with the co-processing facility. That's where I think in 2017 we built it, 2018 we commissioned it. We can now take lipids, fats, and convert that to liquid fuels, diesel fuel, and it's completely fungible in the pipeline system and completely you know, it's easily transported, I guess, to markets around the Puget Sound. And we'd love to do more of that at this business here. And so, like I said, we've been on this journey for a while, but we're accelerating on this journey now. So it's a big point in our history. And I think, you know, if we're being honest, it's about getting the trust of society. You know, people, I think, like I said, they want to be able to have lower emissions energy available to them. And I think we've come a long way to earn back the trust of society, but we have a long way to go in that regard. And I think we're interested and up for that. And, you know, I think we need to continue to add value to our shareholders along the way. So this absolutely has to be about making investments that return a profit to the company, that they are sustainable over the long term. And, you know, otherwise, you know, like I said, if you step out of that and start doing all these projects that aren't profitable, they aren't sustainable over the long haul, and then you don't solve the carbon problem. Somebody will just come into that space, competitor, and pick up what you used to be able to deliver. So it is going to take a while, but we've set our sights on 2050 to to deliver these reductions. So that's it. The slide deck looks longer than this. If you can see, I've got a bunch of backup slides. So, but that's about all I thought that we would have time for today. And I'm happy to take any questions that commissioners or others on the line might have.
Thanks, Pam. You know, you mentioned shareholders and you know, how they react to these things and corporate profits and that sort of thing. When an organization steps out to lead an industry, sometimes that can be problematic in the marketplace. Would you say that your industry in general is moving in this direction? I don't think it's been mandated, but are you on the cutting edge of these initiatives for the whole industry?
Yeah, I mean, we're not the only energy company to be going in this direction, to be sure. I think BP as a company is uniquely, maybe we're, you know, preferentially qualified, I guess, to go down this road. We have significant investments in Europe, and so we operate in the EU, and they have a number of carbon policies that have incentivized this transition, and so we operate well in those kinds of designs. I think in the US, there is a lot of opportunity in that space. And I think because of our experience in Europe and because we are a European company, we have a slightly different view on this. And I think we kind of do well in the complexity of those kinds of policies, quite honestly. And so we'll be advocating, and we are advocating already in a number of different states for carbon policy that incentivizes this transition, whether through a cap and trade program, as we're advocating for here in Washington State, or a carbon tax. We're actually agnostic as to which sort of carbon pricing mechanism you know, states could choose. It would be better to have a system that goes across all markets, so that you could include all sectors in that market, all emitters in that market, and I think then if you have a, you know, a ratable program that's predictable, people can plan for that in their business, and make the kinds of investments that help them along that transition journey. So it needs to be the right kind of policy, and send a signal across all sectors, I think. So it'd be nice to have some sort of link up of, you know, it'd be nice to have a national policy in the US, and that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But absent that, if states are going to go their own way, it would be nice to be able to have programs that could talk to each other among the states so that they could, you know, potentially piece together some sort of market-wide, you know, similar program that talk to each other. So yeah, I think in, you know, the US, maybe some companies, I think a lot of energy companies are thinking about, you know, how they're going to reduce. I think these are pretty bold goals among our sector in general.
You know, in terms of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050, is the large part of your strategy through cap and trade, or do you have other strategies that you probably will be employing to get there? I mean, I know a lot of these details are being worked out now, so that may be premature to answer that question.
Yeah, well, I mean, the general answer to that question is that you need governments to act in this space so that they can incentivize the transition, so that there is a price signal for that there's value in reducing carbon. And so, you know, cap and trade is one way, carbon tax is another. And, you know, I think we're open, and we want to be at the table for areas where we have, you know, where we sell in those markets if they're pursuing other options. So like, for example, some states are pursuing a more executive order kind of approach, regulatory approach, if you will, like Oregon. But we worked with them on legislation to get that passed in Oregon, and we weren't successful. But since they haven't been able to get a cap and trade legislatively, they're looking at other options through the regulatory side. And, you know, that could work too, but there's just, it'll be I think, a more fruitful transition if there are the kinds of, if governments can create the kinds of incentives and instruments that incentivize companies to act in this space. You know, there's cap and trade, you know, allows people to continue operating. It's not like you just have to, if you can't meet it in your manufacturing, you have to offset it somewhere, and then there becomes this market for those offsets, or there becomes a market for the allowances, and then those funds could then be used to reduce carbon. And so so that creates opportunity, as opposed to just the kinds of policies that are just cap but don't give you any, I guess, incentive to implement alternatives. I think what happens in those situations where those alternatives are not available is that companies pull their investment from those areas, and then you just end up with leakage around the world. The same manufacturing will go on somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's really, I think, in all of our interest to have a comprehensive policy that reduces carbon in Washington State and elsewhere.
Any other questions for Pam?
Of course, Jeff. So Pam, thank you.
Sure.
And that last statement, what a progressive statement you made. You know, like that right there is a testament to how much we've changed as a world, where folks like you are making this statement about the need to work together with governments to make this kind of policy evolution happen. And it's just a really positive thing, right? For us all to be thinking that way. Two things. The first thing is, and you may be already well aware of it, but for decades there's been a program that was managed and overseen by the Department of Energy, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, called Clean Cities. Are you familiar with that program?
You know, I'm sorry, Atul, I am not.
Okay, so I'm on the hook. I will send you information and links on that program. Maybe we can have a call. And I in my prior work with clean transportation and fleets, I did a lot of work with that organization. And there's a chapter for Western Washington, and you might find them helpful to you.
Yeah, great. Well, you know, and people in BP may be, I may not be, but we can certainly, let's talk about it, and that might be a useful resource for us. Yeah, thank you.
The other thing is that earlier in this this afternoon's presentations, it came up, so I'm just dropping it on you. The idea of RNG for the refinery, of course, it may not be a very large portion, probably a very small portion, but is that something you've considered? And is that something that a ball that you can explore within BP to see if there's any interest in RNG at the refinery?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting. I mean, you know, we need natural gas to power our facility. And BP is actually, you know, involved in RNG in other places.
Yes,
there could be some good, you know, potential alignment there. You know, hydrogen is part of our future. It's part of our present as well, and we need hydrogen in order to use the co-processing technology to make renewable diesel. And so, gosh, to, you know, get greener natural gas makes greener hydrogen, and I think there could potentially be some synergies there.
Okay, just and two things for us to follow up on.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Good idea.
Mike, anything?
Well, Pam, thank you for your presentation. I would say I would have liked to have learned more about Cherry Point, BP at Cherry Point, hear more about, you shared a lot, you shared a lot about the corporation itself, but I would have been more interested in learning more about the future of BP at Cherry Point and what upgrades and what's really being planned out there. But I don't know if now is the time. Maybe it's a come back and talk to us a later date or something.
Yeah, you know, we're all excited and geared up for what these aims mean for our business. And we actually don't know specifically yet what how it will apply to this refinery. There's some milestones that are set for the company. We'll know more, I think, in September. But for now, I mean, I think, you know, suffice it to say, we're already on that pathway with our renewable diesel. And I think it's been a great business for us to be in. We have the kinds of policies that incentivize that here in the Northwest and in California as well. So we are a great spot in BP's network of refineries to do that kind of business. So it would be great to do some expansion of that over time. But beyond that, you know, we really don't know exactly, you know, how the aims apply to each of the businesses in BP. So, but that said, we're always looking for opportunities and looking for innovative ways to reduce our carbon footprint. You know, even outside this program, before we've rolled out these aims, we've done a lot in that space, and so certainly a lot of advocacy in that space to try to come up with the right kind of policies here in Washington State. But you know, I guess I would love to come back to the PUD maybe in some time, next time you have this kind of gathering, and perhaps we could share more information about that.
Pam, any indication from Bernard Looney when the more developed plans, more detailed plans would come forth? I know earlier, before pre-COVID, it was going to be in September. I suspect that's been delayed.
I don't think it has been delayed by COVID. I think we're on track for September. I haven't heard otherwise. So,
okay.
Yeah, we've had some questions. You know, obviously COVID has been a traumatic experience for many people, many businesses. It's been a challenge for our business and challenging operating environment for sure. And we've had lots of questions. You know, these aims and ambitions were announced on February 12th. And then after that, you know, in the weeks following, of course, the whole world was looking different, you know. So lots of questions like, are you still committed to these aims and ambitions? And I can tell you the answer is yes. And I've heard our CEO say on a couple of different occasions that COVID hasn't lessened our desire for this path. If anything, it's accelerated it. And as we've seen the pace of change accelerated in a number of different ways by COVID, I think that's true in our company as well. We're reorganizing the company. We have a new management system. We are doing away with the old paradigm of upstream and downstream. You know, upstream is oil and gas production, downstream is refining and marketing. And they were two silos, and they've completely been eliminated. We have a number of different leadership groups that integrate those functions now. We are going to be, I think, designing a company in the future that allows us to be more nimble, a little bit flatter, if you will, without as many sort of layers. It'll operate more efficiently and allow us to sort of, I think, embrace a more rapid acceleration of innovation than we've been able to do in the past. And so those changes are going on, and that's a big deal for our workforce, of course. Anytime you have any sort of restructuring or reorganizing, everybody's wondering how it's going to affect them, right? And so that's happening, that undercurrent, but it's all part of this transition. And I think COVID probably just made that happen a little bit more deeply than it would have happened under the just the regular, you know, plan for reorganizing the company.
Great. Steve, I haven't been calling on you to see if you have any questions. I assume that you would have inserted yourself if you would have had any questions along the way, but anything for Pam before we move on to the final presentation?
No, I don't have anything. I just a big thank you to Pam for doing the presentation today, and I think it just really highlights the opportunities for BP and others at Cherry Point to continue to back and forth with the PUD to see if there are opportunities where we can partner on not only projects but programs.
Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah, happy to do it. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it, and I'd love to come back down the road. So
thanks, Pam. We'll have you scheduled for the last week in September. You will have just
yeah. Sounds good.
Thanks for your time today.
All right.
And we are talk about hydrogen in the next presentation. So if you want to stick around, please.
You
do.
know, I've got about 15 minutes and then I've got a hard stop. But yeah, thank you. I'll do that.
Very good. So on to our last presentation for the day. We have Ed Neibauer. Ed, I hope I have pronounced your name correctly, who is proposing a large hydrogen facility at Cherry Point. We've had ongoing discussions, or at least Steve has had ongoing discussions with Ed for the past several months. And Ed's going to tell us in more detail about what he is proposing. So we're very glad to finally get a chance to meet you, Ed.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. So I should go ahead and share the screen?
Please.
I mean, we're running a little bit late, right?
And we're fine if you're fine. I'm sorry that, yeah, these things have a tendency to take a little longer than you expect. So.
Oh, I know. I know.
Don't change it.
Okay. Okay.
Here we go. Good. We can advance. The screen is working. We're all set to go.
We're all set. Okay, great. Again, my name is Edward Neibauer. I'm a chemical engineer, and I started my career with Shell back 40 years ago. All my experience has been upstream and midstream, upstream production, drilling and completing oil and gas wells, and then midstream building pipelines and gas plants, primarily for gas processing. And that's what led me to this. I've been capturing carbon for quite some time, since the mid 80s. And of course, back then we'd capture it at the wellhead for the natural gas wells that had high CO2 content, and we would just vent it. And back then when I was a young engineer, I said, there's a problem with this because that's a fuel, it's a clean fuel. And so I've always been interested in carbon capture. Back then we used membranes. That was the most efficient way of separating the CO2 from the wellhead. And then of course today they're just injecting everything down hole. Well, we're trying to make a fuel out of it. It's something I've been thinking about, like I said, for many years. And this was the perfect opportunity for that. So I chose Whatcom County and Cherry Point because there's just a lot of carbon being emitted. Over 4 million tons of CO2 equivalent based on the 2015 Department of Ecology numbers. And I'm sure it's probably that today too. I've spoken with Pam, I know Pam, and we talked about treating their flue gas. And they've given us all the information. We're going into feed here probably in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be able to make a proposal to BP. I think they're interested. Phillips Petroleum is another party that's extremely interested. They want us to sell them not only hydrogen after we methanate, they want the renewable natural gas too, the syngas. So they are definitely on board with us, and we'll see what happens with BP. Of course, we had really good discussions going on with Alcoa, and then of course that kind of flipped upside down on us. So we're still there. If they ever decide to come back online, we can treat all their SO2 and SOXs and NOXs. So, oh, this is a little touchy here, I see. Let me see here. Okay, these are kind of the stats. You can read them, on your own. I guess the biggest thing, of course, is over the amount of CO2 being emitted, and it's growing, increased from 6.1% from 2012 to 2015, and the biggest emitters are transportation, of course, and industrial, and then of course electricity. So this is kind of the breakdown of the greenhouse gases in 2017. And you can see our focus is up here on the 44.6 to and 23.7. So, you know, we're up there in terms of treating the majority of the greenhouse gas totals. I'm just going to put this in a real simple format. Our whole game plan here is to make clean hydrogen, and that is, of course, using renewable electricity. Hydropower is what I chose. And then, of course, the carbon capture method, which we'll get into, and then methanation, which is the production of renewable natural gas using hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And then, of course, we're going to be producing pure oxygen, and we're going to be producing over 1 million tons per year. And we could either vent that, or we could sell it to Praxair. We've talked to them, or we could use it to rehabilitate the damage caused by hypoxia, which I've studied quite a bit in Washington. This is kind of the format that we're looking at, bringing in the power. Of course, we'll add the water will come in, and then we'll separate it using, we've decided to go with the Siemens electrolyzer. They're very eager to put this out. And of course, we can go either to storage with our hydrogen or into tube trailers or back into the pipeline. And that's our goal. The current uses for hydrogen, of course, most of the hydrogen that we make in the United States is steam reforming, which is heating steam up and at high temperatures and then reforming it into hydrogen. And that's, of course, what BP has. Phillips has no steam reforming. So we're going to replace their steam reforming with clean, pure hydrogen. So, of course, most of the hydrogen today is being fertilizer, of course, petroleum refining and food processing. And the future uses, and this is where we come into play, is transportation and, of course, displacing methane by injecting into the pipeline. So we've got 50% of the hydrogen. I've designed this facility to send 50% of the hydrogen to transportation. And we've talked to Shell, my old employer, they're interested, and the other 50% towards methanation. So that's where we're at with that. Now, again, Whatcom County is an ideal situation because there's plenty of carbon, and that's what we're looking to capture is the carbon, because that's what we can use to make the fuel. And this would be the largest installation in the world. But there are plans on the drawings on the board to make even bigger ones than this, BC or 1,000 megawatts even. So now's the time to do this. I think you know a lot about the hydrogen fuel cells and how it works. We can get into that at some time, but I know everybody's tired, and I'll just kind of skim through this. If you want me to come back at some later time to do a detailed presentation where we have a little bit more time, I'm definitely available for that. And I'll send you a copy of this presentation so you have it as well. This is the kind of an outline of where these fuel cells sit in the cars, and they're in this midsection here. And this is their DC converter, and of course your drivetrain, if you will, your traction, and then of course your batteries are in the back, and that's your fuel storage. And the reason that this has come such a long ways is they've come a long way in designing safe fuel tanks for these vehicles. Hydrogen, could be very volatile, as you know. This is the proposed hydrogen fueling stations along all the interstates. that's was put out by NREL, and you can see this will follow major pipeline routes. So the future goal, as we see it, as I see it, if you will, is that to replace the infrastructure for hydrogen for the whole United States is going to be virtually impossible. So we have to use the existing facilities, and these major pipeline is all over the US, and we would like to start blending hydrogen with natural gas to get a start on producing or burning hydrogen all the way along. I'm sure you're probably well aware of this. The All-American Marine, they're making the first fuel cell vessel. And of course, we'll be right next door. They can pull up and we can fill them up. The marine fuel market, of course, you know of the low sulfur standards that are being required now. And this is a big traffic area here for ships and you know, ferries and the whole bit. So this could be another goal for us to produce hydrogen for. The concept is pretty straightforward. You've got deionized water coming in, you got your power, and you have your electrolysis modules, and you've got your oxygen and hydrogen with no emissions. There's no emissions here because all we're doing is separating out hydrogen and oxygen. This has been a big effort for me, is to pick the right carbon capture technology. And of course, we got the CO2 and the flue gas. This is just a real simple view on it. We're going to separate out or add the hydrogen to it, then methanate it, and also capture all the waste heat, and then produce the synthetic natural gas or renewable natural gas, which is really methane. Renewable natural gas is primarily 96% methane. That gas that we burn in our houses, in our furnaces, in our stoves is right around 900 BTU gas, and it's about 80% methane. Otherwise, we would never be able to burn that high fuel gas in our homes because it's too hot. Just again, a simple flow diagram. You can study this at your own leisure, but the hydrogen can be used either as a feedstock for methanation, or it can be used as a transportation fuel in the gas grid or transportation fuel. This is a conceptual design of the membrane separation facility, and they're very good. I bought these back in the mid 80s. The efficiencies on there are very high in terms of capturing carbon, above 99%. And they've really perfected it. The membrane technology and research company out of California, they bought the Grace membrane system, and they're very high on the list of EPA, the DOE, in terms of capturing carbon. So we're definitely considering them. Again, hypoxia areas that I reviewed and studied. This is the area that we're focused on right here. I did a design for it. It's preliminary until we get all of the numbers put out, but we're going to be needing about 15 tons per day of pure oxygen, and of course we're going to have over 1,000 tons per day. So this is the design that was chosen, and I've used the same engineering company that had worked on this before. So we're not wasting any time, and I've got a cost down, so we're in pretty good shape there. The diffuser system is really designed very simplistic. You lay your pipeline, if you will, with holes in it at that strata that has the hypoxia in it, and then you just pump pure oxygen in there. It'll clean up. There's been plenty of case histories of this design in various reservoirs and lakes that is used for drinking water, and it's been very, very successful. Again, we chose to work on the environmental cleanup side of things with our oxygen, as opposed to to do anything else with it. And so that's what we're planning on doing with it. And anything else that we have, any extra that we have, we can definitely sell or we can vend. The site. This is the site. There's, of course, BP. That's, of course, Alcoa. And that's Phillips 66. This is the old SSA Marine site lands. And we've entered into an agreement. We're close on signing a purchase and sale agreement and hopefully close within the next 30 days. And then we'll go ahead and start our permitting and environmental review. We have allocated the funds to make this acquisition. And once we have a signed PSA, the closing should be fairly quickly and should be in good shape with that as well. I guess the key economic drivers, it's cost-effective supplies, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the electrical costs that we need with the PUD #1. There's obviously a big demand for hydrogen. I think we're seeing that grow exponentially every day. And there's an existing infrastructure there for all the utilities we need. So that is very attractive. Again, I just summarized this before. So it's zoned properly. There's an existing pipeline in the place, a natural gas pipeline. There's ample power available, ample fresh water, and we have good rail access and highway access. Even though we don't plan on using any rail access, but it's there. All right, that's just the summary of what I stated before. So, collaboration is really big for me. I've done it in other areas where we use local university, grads to teach them on the opportunity of working on clean fuels. I think it's be good, and it would definitely enhance the customers as well. It'd be a plus for them. It's an expensive venture, gentlemen. It's ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry. It's a very expensive venture, and we're looking to allocate this type of capital with using Chapman Davis as our capital raise, and we're very, very close to having that completed. We've already closed on the final investment decision, which has been primarily the seed capital, the risk portion, to cover the site costs, to cover the entitlements and the permitting. I just wanted to kind of give you a current project status as we have it. We've chosen to work with Rambo US Corp on the permitting. The EPC contractor was a big decision. We chose to go with the Zachary Group, which is a very well-known contractor. Electrolyzers, we're going to go with Siemens Energy, which is a well-known engineering firm, a manufacturing and engineering firm. Methanation with MAN. Carbon capture technology, we've decided to go with Siemens and or MTR in here. Those are the two we haven't chosen yet. I forgot to put that in there. And then Siemens will do waste capture, waste heat capture. We're going to go with Praxair on the NOx reduction. And on the SOx reduction, we're going to go with Solvay, which is using sodium bicarbonate. Praxair uses hot oxygen burners. Chapman Davis will do our capital raise, and then we've got Wood, the other engineering companies on the geotech, Senko, of course, marine and support, and then Jacobs and MEI, excuse me, on the oxygen diffuser. They're already done on the design on that. And that's it. Pretty simple, pretty quick.
Well,
I want to get shovel ready, gentlemen. I want to start building something.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. Let's see. Let me just make sure that I'm. Yeah, here you can hear me. Well, thank
Should
you.
I stop this now or leave it up?
Go ahead and leave that up. I'm
Okay.
sure that the other questions as we get into this a little bit. We certainly appreciate the thought that has gone into this and identifying the strategic advantages of this site. It looks like a very exciting proposal for sure. I'm gonna ask for any questions. I'm sure there are quite a few between Atul and Mike, so I'll wait until after they have an opportunity to weigh in.
Okay.
Is your investment firm going about this as a traditional project finance with the project finance model, or?
Well, it is. I mean, but the equity portion right now is going to be all private equity. And then any debt service that we put on this capital raise, I'm not a big debt guy. I don't mind putting debt on a project once I know it's cash flowing and can service the debt. But the worst thing anybody can do is put a bunch of debt on a project that you don't have a cash flow model yet after startup. So it's going to be primarily 40% private equity and 60% debt. And we structured the debt portion of it as a long-term debt as opposed to short-term. Most projects in the oil and gas industry, debt is less than 7 years. But this is ideal for a long-term debt acquisition or instrument.
So I imagine there's challenges like for people taking this scale of a project seriously, everything from guaranteeing you the supply of CO2 to offtake of the methane and the hydrogen. Everybody's probably coming to you and saying, really? You're really going to have this? So is that part of the reason why you're so heavy on equity?
Well, I think that's what the financing model shows that we need to have for a project like this. Once we get more, more history behind it, then we can go to project less equity on it. Probably 30-70, 20-80.
Right. And is there a rationale why you would make renewable natural gas instead of just selling the hydrogen? Because there's hydrogen customers right there. So what's the advantage to making a ton of renewable natural gas? I mean, like taking a ton of hydrogen and directing it towards renewable natural gas over directing it towards direct use?
Well, that's a really good question. The reason is to reduce the carbon footprint of those emitters in Cherry Point. There's a lot of carbon going up in that small area. And if we can reduce that, pardon me?
So, but we don't have a social cost of carbon yet. So,
yes.
Meaning you don't have a revenue model associated with converting CO2, as far as I know. So
I do.
You do?
Oh, I do.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you've got a buyer for mitigated CO2.
Yes.
Okay. So, and that value is competitive with the direct sale of hydrogen, basically.
Well, again, the Atul?
Yeah.
Is that Atul? The whole concept behind capturing the carbon is reducing the CO2 emissions and converting that to a fuel to generate revenues.
So is the revenue off the CO2 or the revenue off the RNG?
Well, the revenue is going to be off of the RNG on the final product, and on the feedstock, this end of the feedstock end of this, we're still in negotiations with the emitters. We're a lot further with P66 than we are, of course, with BP, but Phillips can take all the hydrogen and all the CNG and all the renewable electricity they can get.
Yeah. Have you looked at the potential for this particular facility to be an active load?
When you say an active load, it's going to produce 24/7.
Okay, so but there's potential money in having your consumption of electricity vary based on market conditions. Now, Washington State in the Northwest is way behind California in this regard. But is that something that you've investigated at all about the potential of having some variability in your consumption of electricity?
Well, I just looked at it from a straightforward 24/7 tool operating, producing. We won't have any storage. The hydrogen can be stored in the pipeline system. We've had discussions with Cascade and Northwest, and they're all very, very interested in taking this to the next level. So, you know, right now that's our business model, and any type of incentives. The only thing that we've really considered is the 45Q tax credit for carbon for the EPA. It's been approved, but there's some guidelines that are still being drafted. But that definitely helps us. We ran our economics with and without it, and the economics still are favorable.
Okay. Well, it's maybe something for follow-up.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm very open to any suggestions you have, but
yes, there's stuff happening in the area of having demand that is flexible. You know, as solar and wind continues to grow. Obviously, we're lucky in the Northwest that we have hydro to balance supply and demand. But it's also beneficial to have other facilities that can be responsive to variability in production.
Well, I don't have any type of criteria for that. If there's, if you could send me some guidelines, if you will, on how that would work, I could definitely put it in my model tool and see if the numbers shake out.
Okay, I will. It's not me personally, but yeah, I can facilitate that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Ed, can you talk a little bit about the permitting pathway for a facility like this and your perceived project timeline at this point anyway? I know it's kind of fluid.
Well, we were on a pretty solid timeline that I drafted before the virus hit, and things got blown up completely. I thought this thing would last 30 days. This is my 4th virus I think I've been through in my life. It seems to always dissipate and things get back to normal and schools are never shut down, if you will, but this is a different one. And so I really am not sure exactly what our timeline will be going forward. But on the permitting side, the environmental review that we're going to have done is going to be pretty straightforward because we'll have no emissions from that facility. The electrolyzers won't have any emissions, very few emissions from the methanation facility. And so this is strictly a clean fuels facility, just straightforward, and with little or no emissions.
Mm-hmm. Once the project is up and operating, can you give us a sense of the number of jobs that will be supported by the facility?
Yeah. I'm used to building facilities that employ 200 or 300 people minimum, gas plants and what have you. Construction during the construction period, easily over 1,000. Nobody's built a facility like this before, so we're still working on the manpower we'll need, both for operations, but I'm anticipating that we could be hiring at least 100 to 150 people and maybe 750 people during the construction period and 100 to 150 people long-term.
Okay. Yeah. And I know that, in terms of next steps, once you do close on the property, one of the first things that you would be asking of the PUD is doing a feasibility analysis on power supply that we would be able to bring to the table.
Yes.
do you have a sense from a timing perspective when that would occur?
Well, once we sign the PSA, Jeff, we'll go ahead and start sending out all these the risk capital portion of this that includes the studies, environmentally review, permitting procedures, geotech, everything that we'll need to get started on immediately. Permitting will take about 9 months,
okay,
according to what Rambo said. They've already got the air dispersion model already set up because they've already done an environmental assessment on the SSA Marine Gateway Terminal project. So, so we'll just use that same air dispersion model and just plug in new numbers. So that's already been built.
Yeah, okay. And I suspect some of this will be determined on what sort of commitments you can get from at least the localized customers, your discussions with BP and Phillips 66 and others.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I had my first discussion with BP in April of 2019. So I've been talking to them for a long time. They are definitely looking to get into the transition game. And of course, Phillips as well. I started in 2019, Jeff, in meeting with these people and talking to them.
Okay, great. Mike, any questions on your list?
Oh, not really, Jeff. Ed, in a lot of ways, spoke above my head quite a few times. So
I don't think so, Mike.
But it's an interesting project. I'm going to have to think about it to come back with any good questions. So
that's great. I had to think about it for almost 2 years before I went ahead and pulled the trigger on this. All the money I've spent so far in this thing invested has been my own. I own 100% of Washington Clean Energy at this point. We might be bringing in some major partners in this, but right now it's just me 100%.
Okay, very good. Atul, any other questions at this juncture?
No.
Steve?
Yes.
Do you have any other questions or comments?
No, I don't at this time. I mean, I've been communicating with our friend Ed for a number of months, and Brian Walters has been also, and we've been back and forth on establishing next steps that you asked about, Jeff, in terms of what Ed will need from us to start developing a much more secure source of energy, and start developing some cost estimates for, possibly tapping BPA transmission lines, building that substation that would service the project. But at this time, I don't have anything more. And just await Ed's check in the mail, if you would.
It's coming. It's coming. I feel it now. We've got the approval to close with SSA Marine from our partners, so we're good.
Great.
My financial partners. That has nothing to do with ownership, but
yeah.
Brian has already made contact with BPA and opened that discussion up about the potential for us to tap their transmission lines in that project site area, and so I would suggest that BPA is actually quite interested, not in just in the idea of tapping their transmission line and them providing service to the site, but the potential of getting into a contract to purchase that much power from BPA. So we're looking forward to moving forward.
Great. Well, Ed, this is a very exciting project, and we're glad to hear more details of it. And we wish you best of luck in closing some of these details. So as Steve indicated, we can get on to the next step. We'd love to love to participate with you in this adventure.
Well, we're looking forward to it. I've been involved with building facilities for a long time. The thing about it, Jeff, is that once you get to a point where you have that warm, fuzzy feeling in your stomach, we're there. And once the project starts talking to you what needs to be done, then you know you've got something going. So, and that's where we're at.
Yeah, great. Well, very good. Thank you for wrapping up this day of presentations.
Yeah, well, no problem. I'm sorry, my background is dark. I didn't flip the light switch on. This is this remote stuff it's okay to a certain extent, but I'd rather be there in person so we could definitely talk across the table from each other.
Well, perhaps in the next conversation, just do
next
that.
time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
So I know the hour is late. We've gone on a little longer than we had expected. I know personally my hard drive is a little bit full. I know we talked about devoting a little bit of time to an energy wrap up, Steve, and I don't know if you had something prepared for this or not really.
No, Commissioner, what we were expecting to do in the wrap up was provide an opportunity for any questions from participants or attendees that were not panelists today. And then I think that we've already covered through the different presentations or after the different presentation questions by our commissioners. So I think that at this point, Ann, I don't think we have any outstanding questions, do we?
No, we don't. There were just a couple during the PSC presentation that I did forward to Corinne and Jeff.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry, Benjamin.
Okay.
So hoping to get answers for them, but that was it. No other comments.
So I guess the question, the answer is, Commissioner, it's up to you and Mike and Atul to decide whether you want to have any further discussion at this point, or if you feel that the time is a bit late and we might follow up at a future regular commission meeting. We already had expected that by the first meeting in August, I believe, that we were going to come back and have on your agenda, discussion about the topics today, the presentations today, and then start again prioritizing actions for the 2021 budget. So
I would recommend, I personally, and I'd like to hear from both Mike and Atul, personally, these have been a lot of good presentations on ideas in various different directions in terms of the energy sector. And I wouldn't mind letting some of this marinate a little bit and come back at a future meeting and have more of a discussion about that. Mike, how do you feel about it?
Well, let me be honest with everyone. This is my first time I sat for a whole day Zoom. I don't know how the rest of you do it. I feel like I want to go home and take my eyeballs out and put them in some liquid or something. I can barely, so I'm done. I'm ready to go home.
Well, I'm, again, at the end of these, usually there's a happy hour. I'm going to go host a one-person happy hour down at Boundary Bay. So if anybody's close and wants to join me, come on down.
Is there a reason, Jeff, you didn't ask me the question? Is there a reason?
Well, until you went off
I had 2
camera,
hours of questions ready to go, Jeff.
barking, and I just assumed that you were dealing with some sort of wild animal out there. But anyway, go ahead.
No, I'm on board. I just wanted to say in the afternoon session, there was a follow-up item that was pretty material to PUD business regarding, starting with really Brian's suggestion and then leading into conversation on demand side management that I started to have with PSC personnel. So that's something that we'll be following up with. Nothing appropriate to discuss further now, but I just wanted to make sure that we all registered that that's something that I think it's appropriate for us to follow up out of this energy discussion.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we really appropriately did this out of the morning, but I think we do need to go forward and come up with kind of the main takeaways from the broadband discussion this morning, and not now. I'd suggest that we make that a topic of discussion at our next PUD meeting to figure out where our consensus is on where we move forward on the subject of broadband as well.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. At our meeting next week is to, as you say, kind of our takeaways from both broadband and from power. And I think we should spend a little bit of time doing a follow-up discussion. I think that one of us is bumping up against a deadline at 10 o'clock. So we need to be done by that time. Do I have that correct? I think I have that correct. So it depends on how much time we have devoted to our agenda next Tuesday. But I think while this is still fresh in our mind, I think we should, follow up and have that discussion. Does that sound good, buddy? Steve, is that a quizzical look on your face? Like what did he just say? I can't tell.
Yeah, that's a look you see.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, tomorrow, by end of business day tomorrow, we hope to get our agenda out for next Tuesday, and at the latest Thursday, but so day after tomorrow. But I'm just wondering, so should we just have a item on that agenda as recouping and discussing today's topics and presentations, and just leave it at that? But then I would suggest that each of the commissioners be prepared to really enter into that discussion next Tuesday, so that that discussion leads an opportunity for staff to follow up very specifically on the topics, and issues.
Yeah, I think this would appear in old business if I'm correct.
Right.
And I would break it into two segments. One having to do with broadband. That one's probably more specific. And I think, John, you asked the question early on, what are our goals as a PUD if we are to enter into the environment? So I think that's question number one. I would like each of the three commissioners to be prepared to answer. And then any follow-on comments we would have that would have an impact for the 2021 budget. So I think that's a fairly specific discussion. As it relates to energy and the presentations that we've talked about, I don't anticipate that we would have any specific actions on that, but if each commissioner would be prepared to talk about their takeaways from this afternoon's discussion, I think that would be very helpful.
And I will do my best to have all the presentations gathered and printed and sent along in the packet for everybody.
That'd be great.
I'd prefer mine not printed. If I could review mine electronically.
Okay.
So,
that's same with me as well, Ann. The electronic versions.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, very active day, lots of information, lots of great information. I think it was really valuable for all of us to be hearing this at the same time in real time. So I'm looking forward to the conversation next Tuesday. Steve, thanks again for lining this all up, and Mike and whomever else was involved in kind of organizing all of this. Not easy to get everyone kind of in the same Zoom room as it were, but I think it came off very well today. So I appreciate that very much.
And at your direction, I'm going to send out tomorrow morning a thank you on behalf of the commission to all the presenters.
Yeah.
I've already done that, even yesterday afternoon, expecting their presentations would be well done and engaging. But there was this last week, it took a lot of effort not saying that negatively, but a lot of work with between Ann and myself and getting folks committed, especially our friends from Skagit County. Their response today was, I just thought, was outstanding, and that just really came together in the last couple of days. So I'll send it out to them, and a big thank you.
Great. Okay, well, with that, I think we'll draw this day to a close. We'll see everyone in a week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.